it becomes the difference between these one dropper official black people in history is about like the difference between the way a swarthy Greek or Italian and maybe a slightly swarthy Hispanic in this country are treated versus a German or an English person, okay? And that has always been the case. So while things may have existed on paper, what Kofi did, because of how far back he went, he was able to demonstrate that there was never a time, not even, in the 1700s or 1800s, in which people who did not look phenotypically black got treated as black. And you know what they say, right? You don't listen to what a person says, you watch what they do. If you really want to know whether or not a person is classified as black or not, what you do is you look at how they are or were treated, not what white people say. Okay? So that maxim about watch behavior proves more than words holds all over the place, and it certainly holds on this subject. Okay, so this is basically a white man saying, and I've heard white people say this before, that the degree to which quote-unquote black people are able to achieve our intelligence is directly related to how much black genetics we have, or that is to say, how little. In other words, whatever it is that we do that's that is noteworthy or is of any great utility is due to the non-black ancestry. This is what he is saying. Okay. Now, I've explained why his reasoning is incorrect, and what I think logically has to be concluded as to the actual reasoning. And whenever unambiguously black people accomplish anything, you have to assume the level of intelligence to be probably 5 times as great as it would have taken for a non-black person to achieve the same thing, because of the barriers that they've had to go through to get there. So that's that one. And then we go on to these persons. Okay, so I want you to take a look at that person. Again, I borrowed these persons from Kofi's broadcast. Please go over and look at his original broadcast. But this is a person whose name is Alexander Twilight. He was born September 23rd, 1795, and he died in 1857. He was an American, this is what Wiki says about him. He was an American educator, minister, and politician. He is said to be the first, they say African American, I'm just going to say black, the first black man known to have earned a bachelor's degree from an American college or university, graduating from Middlebury College in 1823. And Middlebury College to this day ranks very highly in terms of its exclusivity and its high level of academic ranking, its prestige. And a bachelor's degree in college during that time, as Kofi pointed out on his program, was really something akin to what a PhD is thought of today. It was a big, big deal. Okay, should it be any surprise that he was the first? Because he wasn't really black. Okay, the next one is going to be Charles Drew, who many, many people have heard of. That's what he looks like. Does that look like a black man to you? He doesn't to me. And Charles Drew was born in 1904, certainly when the one-drop rule was in full effect. And he was an American surgeon and medical researcher. He is said by Wiki to have researched in the field of blood transfusions, developing improved techniques for blood storage, and applied his expert knowledge to developing large-scale blood banks early in World War II. This allowed medics to save thousands of lives of Allied forces. And then it says, as the most prominent black man, they say African American in the field, Drew protested against the practice of racial segregation in the donation of blood, as it lacked scientific foundation, and resigned his position with the American Red Cross, which maintained the policy until 1950. So I would say thank you and have great appreciation for him being an ally of actual black people, but was he actually one? No, he was one formally. I will say that he would not have been given those opportunities, nor would he have been allowed probably to escape terrorism, meaning threats on his life or his family or his residence, had he actually been a black man. None of those things. Next. This is a woman who came very late to prominence. She is one of the actual women from Hidden Figures, and her name is Kathleen Johnson. I'm not Kathleen, Katherine Johnson. Katherine Coleman Goebel Johnson. She was born in 1918, again, a time in which the official one-drop rule was supposedly in full effect, and she is supposed to be the first black, not first, but she was one of the first, a black mathematician whose calculations of orbital mechanics as a NASA employee. This is hitting close to home for me because that's that's one of the ways that bills got paid in our house as I was growing up. My father had a long career at NASA, and so he really can speak to this. He can speak to the way the film was crafted, what was left out. He can speak very, very well to that. But yeah, she was critical to the success of the first and subsequent U.S. manned space flights. He's going to speak to some gender politics as regards to racism at NASA. But yeah, that's her. And then there's a second picture of her when she's older, and you can get another view of her that's not black and white, although she's much older. Again, to me, clearly not a black woman. This, believe it or not, is also someone who was considered black. Okay, his name, I got this from Kofi. His name was Lemuel Haynes, and he was born in 1753. He died in 1833. So he was born at a time before the United States Constitution was even penned, before there was the Revolutionary War that separated England from the United States. He was the first black man in the United States to be ordained as a minister, which was a big deal back then, because remember, the whole separation of church and state was a big deal, but clergymen who were ordained had, the official stamp of approval was sort of like getting the official stamp of approval from a university. These were supposedly learned people who were spreading a history and a gospel of something that was supposedly very important, and supposedly expert in interpreting a very important document that they held at that time, which was the 1611 King James Bible. He became an anti-slavery activist. Again, I would put this in the same basket as Mexicans or Hispanics today who are not black, but who rail against white supremacy. What they are doing is, you don't want to be second class on that non-black team, but you're clearly in that non-black team. If you were not on that non-black team, you would not have been given that opportunity. And so, as if we're talking about European people, pink people, or if we're talking about people who look that way, even though they may have some black ancestry, or if we're talking about people who clearly look to be in between. They are neither black nor white, but they are certainly not black. Any of those people can do things that are in strong allyship with black people's interests. I would say John Kennedy, sure, he had many flaws. He could have been much better, but if you ask people who were adults at the time he was assassinated, including Neely Fuller Jr. and my father and many others, he was assassinated. It wasn't a mob hit because they thought he was putting their interests at stake because of his brother, who was the Attorney General at the time, Robert F. Kennedy, was going after the mob. None of that is all obfuscation. He was killed because he was thought to have been opening the doors of opportunity too much for black people. That is why he was killed. So he was an ally. I would say the same thing of John Brown. I would say the same thing of all of the radical Republicans at the time of the Civil War and just after, in that period of Reconstruction. I've forgotten all of their names, that escape me at this moment, but you can look up radical Republicans. But probably the most famous was Thaddeus Stevens, and he is responsible for sponsoring the 13th Amendment, which had supposedly abolished involuntary servitude. And that's an issue, abolishing involuntary servitude and slavery. I am now questioning whether or not that was put in there because they were in fact two different things. But that is not the subject of this broadcast. But yeah, he was responsible for that. He was responsible for the 1866 Civil Rights Package, which was the only civil rights package until 100 years later in 1964 when that was passed. And he insisted on being buried in a grave that was remote and that included Black Americans because he wanted his principles to be upheld even in death. Now, that type of thing you have to say is strong allyship, but just as John Kennedy and Thaddeus Stevens, we applaud their commendable behavior, but we don't in any way say that they are deserving of an appellation or designation of being Black persons. Okay, they wouldn't have been able to get where they were had they been at that time. The same can be said, however, for one droppers or 3 or 4 droppers or 5 droppers. These hybrids, if they're not Black phenotypically, they're not Black. Now, even if they railed against some of the things that were happening to unambiguously Black people and the slight indignities, and they are slight compared to what unambiguously Black people went through, and the slight indignities that they had to endure, they are doing so in a commendable fashion, but that does not make them Black. And their descendants who are unambiguously white, to the degree that they are, certainly are not Black, and so they don't meet that first requirement of being a Black person. Simply identifying yourself as Black for 10 years is not enough. There are any number of people who will do that. Rock Newman, look that up. At this point, Rachel Dolezal has been doing it so long that she might qualify, and she might be able to actually find one of her ancestors out of the 256 in 1865 who were enslaved, or just go back one more generation and double that to 512, or one more generation and go back, and that's 1024. Find one document. So right now, that's what's on the table, as I understand it, what I've covered, what I've been able to follow from William Darity is if you can document one ancestor who was a slavery, and if you yourself have been claiming to be Black for 10 years, then you would qualify. Now, that's a problem. That's a problem now, although the numbers are smaller, but it's a greater peril going forward because, of course, that incentivizes non-Black people marrying into and procreating with Black people, and then you end up in the same situation as all of these Native American tribes who looked very dark-skinned with Asiatic features who are now really white people. And there still are these dark-skinned people who have Asiatic features who are descendants of the original people when they first got their land grants and what have you, but they're drinking themselves to death on the reservation. And this is the situation we will find ourselves in 2 generations, 3 generations at most, if we don't take this phenotype standard seriously. And that takes courage because just about all of us have family. Some of it is first degree family. Some of it is our mothers, our fathers, our sisters, our brothers, certainly our cousins. We have friends. It takes courage to say, I love you, but you're not Black. Something else I learned from my father many years ago is let's take 3 qualities. One of them happens to be fine looks. You were gifted in the when the DNA was assembled, or whoever is responsible for how you look, determine how you look. You just came out to be you're eye candy. They're good-looking people. That you don't find really good-looking people that often, but often enough. I would say probably 1 out of every 10 people is somebody that almost everybody would say that's a really, really good-looking man or woman. But then there are intelligent people, and that's less rare. People who just their neurons and their synapses fire very well, not only efficiently and effectively, but they also happen to be gifted in being creative and making the novel practical, being able to use that brain power to bring some new useful application, idea, thought, or invention to the world. Those people are less numerous. It's much less. You're much less likely to encounter such people. I don't know what the percentage is, but let's just say I don't know. I mean, even if you went with the official line that an IQ of, I think it's over 140 is considered genius. I mean, there's some degree of arbitrariness to it, and whether or not IQ actually measures intelligence is another question. But if it were, that's only 2% of the population. So that's a very small percentage of the population. But people of character, of integrity, those are like, I don't know, something more rare than diamonds. You can find the first two, even though it's not that common, it's not the norm. But people who are willing to stand up for what is correct are very rare, because there's always a cost to that. There's a cost to your popularity. There's a cost to your career. There's a cost to your good feelings and relations with friends and sometimes family. To find a person of integrity, and we're not talking about people who are perfect in every way. We're not talking about people who you can't pull out a skeleton here or there. But we're talking about overall people who stand up for what is right, even at great personal sacrifice. Those people are very, very rare. And so it is not surprising to me, and I know that this broadcast in particular will rub people the wrong way, because it is not surprising to me to find a small number of people who are willing to take that hard but logical line. We know what is going to happen to generations after us if we do not have a phenotype requirement, and one that can't be wiped away easily, which is why I created the algorithm I am. I'm a chip off my father's block. My algorithm is not nearly as rigorous as the ones he did. But this is why I created the algorithm, so that it can't just be wiped away like the attempt in Brazil, because it wasn't concrete enough. Okay, there wasn't a way to measure it. It was too subjective. But if we don't stand up and say, no, what happened to the Native Americans is not going to happen to us, we absolutely require a phenotype measurement, a line that you have to meet in order to even move forward to see whether or not you are a descendant of slavery. It's not surprising to me that there are very few people who have the character and integrity to stick with that. That comes at some cost. But it is what it is. We're going to have to get there at some point. Okay, I think that's all of the black verse. Oh no, there's one more. This is, the name of this man is, this is someone else that Bro Kofi found over on the Crab venue. CRAB, go check him out. This is Patrick Francis Healy. He was known to be a Jesuit priest and educator, and he was the president of Georgetown University from 1874 to 1882. And he was known for expanding that school following the American Civil War. And there's even a hall called Healy Hall that was named after him. And he identified with his Irish heritage, but when it became known that he had some black ancestry, there were some people who designated him as black, but it did not affect, his achievements. He was the first supposedly black person to earn a PhD, so you can imagine. So of course he looks like that. So what that white man said in that one video about black history being a farce because of the way that it's told, all of the inventions by black persons during slavery that were stolen by white folks, during chattel slavery that was stolen by white folks, we'll never know about those. And my father will tell the story about him having to make a choice, because he knew, everyone around him knew, that the first algorithm especially, well, all of them really, but he knew that the algorithm that would allow computers to draw lifelike objects the way that they would appear in real life, he knew that was of great commercial value, right? I'm saying at least as much as anything that Bill Gates or Steve Jobs did. He knew that. And there were people who were trying to steal it from him, and he had to make a choice. I remember it because I was a child. I heard the dinner time conversations. It was really tough. I mean, we could pick up the phone anytime, just pick up the phone to dial, and we could hear people talking on the phone, over the dial tone. There were people in and out of our house. My father, those are back in the days where computer code had to be done on what was called punch cards. So it's a long, long time ago. And my father had to take steps to secure the punch cards in various locations so that if anything happened to him. But he had to make a choice. His name is David Hedgley Jr., named after his father. And he had to make a choice as to whether or not, because he was getting offers. He was getting offers from various corporations to buy his, and it could have been worked out. It could have been said, well, that since he did it on NASA time, on government time, it would have been illegal. But I mean, that type of thing is done routinely. So he was getting offers to buy his algorithm, to buy his software. And the offers weren't high enough, but they would have set us up. I mean, I wouldn't be living like I'm living today and have lived. But the choice was this: if he sold it to them, he was never ever going to be named as the author of the algorithm. Or he could take no money whatsoever and go down in history as the person who wrote the algorithm. And so my father chose the latter. For me, I don't know if it's the influence of my father being his daughter and in his household and sitting at his dinner table and watching his example. I don't know to what degree integrity on these matters of race are a result of that, or if it's something that some very rare strength of character thing that is somewhere in the DNA. I don't know. All I know is that's where I stand. And he and I have discussed this phenotype requirement, and I've gotten a lot of history from him on it. And I had him think about the ideas logically and give me feedback. And he doesn't pull back. He doesn't pull punches. If he thinks that something I'm saying is illogical, he has no problem telling me that it's not. But he and I are on one accord on this. The phenotype is where it's at. And that really gets into this whole issue of the Caribbean. Okay? So are black people from the Caribbean or South America, are they due any reparations under the ADOS or AIOS agenda, depending on where they came? Now, if they came in the last 5 or 10, 20 years even, maybe not. But if you're talking about people, and I'm going to put up those pictures, so if you'll be patient with me, I'll get them up here. Okay. So actually, you should be looking at the thumbnail. You saw the thumbnail. There was Shirley Chisholm was up there. She was a Caribbean immigrant, or the daughter of one. That's an unambiguously black woman. And had it not been for Shirley Chisholm, we wouldn't have food stamps to this day, which a lot of black people depend upon. She was elected. She wanted a good assignment in the U.S. Congress, and they thought they were playing a game with her and insulting her by putting her on a little known and low prestige committee called the Agriculture Committee. But she went in there and made lemonade out of lemons, right? And that's how we got, she in the Agriculture Department put forth a bill for food stamps, which we now know as, a lot of people call it EBT, or there's another name for it, SNAP. I've forgotten what SNAP stands for. But, this was a woman who was a U.S. Congresswoman. She definitely has a trail that you can trace her immigration to the islands. But she was a congresswoman in 1968. I'm not sure when she was born. I should have looked it up. but sometime before 1930, I'm sure. So her family and her parents lived through the hell of Jim Crow. I don't care if they were in the North or where they were. And the resolution, I think it's House Resolution 40 by John Conyers, that one that Cory Booker says he wants studied, it doesn't just propose reparations for chattel slavery. It proposes that repair be done and compensation be given for those who suffered the effects of Jim Crow, for those who suffered the effects of redlining, for those who suffered the effects of current discrimination in the job market, in loans, in housing, even if you're renting. And certainly if you were a black person in 1920, 1930, 1940, 1950, 1960, 1970, I'm even going to say 1980. Now I might pull up a little bit on going any further than that. Okay, I probably wouldn't go any further than 1980. But I would even compromise and stop it at 1960. But at some place, it's reasonable to say they caught the same hell we did. So if the package is for harm due after chattel slavery, why wouldn't they do that? Now, some might say as a matter of, and again, please be looking at that picture. In fact, maybe I should try to upload it. Some might say, as a matter of strategy, well, yeah, they caught hell, but they should seek their own. Since they didn't suffer chattel slavery, they should be not falling under the ADOS or AIOS, American Inheritors of Slavery, agenda. Let them do their own as immigrants of the Caribbean. I have a hard time with that, as a matter of strategy, them doing that, especially when we're going to accept the help that they gave us. So we're going to accept all the hard work that they did, that Shirley Chisholm did on our behalf. And you might want to make a similar argument with these white folks, but it's not the same thing because they did not, or these hybrids, they did not experience the preferential treatment that these other non-black folks did. These are phenotypically black people who suffered the same hell as those of us who descend from chattel, people who were enslaved during the chattel slavery period. And let me just stop and say, listen, I understand that people have a lot of problems when one says you are a descendant of slaves and they prefer that it be said that you are a descendant of slavery. I actually think that, I actually think that the semantics are not worth the trouble. I have never, and the argument behind that is supposedly that we're supposed to know that these were full people, that the character of them was never as a slave. That wasn't all they were. They were people who happened to be enslaved. I never doubted that. It's like if someone is imprisoned or somebody is kidnapped, and I say they're a kidnap victim, or let's say they're a prisoner of war. They're a prisoner of war. That's what they are. That doesn't define all of who they are. They are full people. This is exactly how I've always thought of as slaves. I've never questioned it. To me, I don't understand this insistence that we use descendants of slavery rather than slaves. The shame is not on the slave or the descendant of the slave. The shame is on the enslaver, not the slave. So why in the world would I have a problem with saying I'm a descendant of a slave? I'm a descendant of someone who was treated unjustly. It, to me, is very similar to people who say they don't want to see any more slave films because they want people to know that black people do other things besides being slaves. They don't want to see any more struggle films. They like the Cosby Show because it shows that black people can live in conditions other than squalor. And that, not all black people have to live as if they're poor. To me, it smacks of the same thing. The fact of the matter is that compared to non-black people, when you adjust for generation coming here, black people are living in poverty. We are. That is not our shame. That's the shame of the people who practice anti-blackness. So I don't understand it.